Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of Monster Kid Radio. I'm your host, Derek M. Cook. I want to welcome you to the podcast where we celebrate the classic and sometimes not so classic cinema of yesteryear. And this week, I'm really excited. We've got Devon Devereaux on the show. Now, Devon Devereaux is a Portland-based illustrator who has a handful of work out there that you guys really need to be checking out right now. Start by going to his website. It's devondevereaux.com. His name is spelled DEVONDEVEREAUX.com. Of course, there will be a link in the show notes to this episode and then episode 6 as well, getting you to his website if you want to go check out his work. Now, he's the man behind 2 collections called Tales of Hot Rod Horror, Volume 1 and Volume 2. You can pick them up at your local comic book stores. You can pick them up on Amazon. I highly recommend you guys check these out. He was kind of the man behind putting the whole thing together. He's got a story in there, and there are a handful of stories from other writers and illustrators in these 2 collections, and there's a part 3 in the works right now. I highly recommend you guys go check that out. Something else you can go check out is Beyond the Dangers of a Ghost Scorpion. That's the band doing the music that's opening the show this week. This is the song Goatman's Bridge. You can find out more about what they do over at ghostscorpion.bandcamp.com or look them up on Facebook. It's facebook.com/BTDOAGS. You'll hear this song in its entirety at the end of the show, so stay tuned for that. Before we dive into part 1 of our chat with Devon, I want to go ahead and let you guys know about our contact information. You can find all this over at our website at monsterkidradio.net. You can find us on Facebook. Just look us up. We have both a page and a group. Now, you have to ask to join the group, and that's where a lot of the conversations are happening. When you find the page, if you can do me a favor, just like it. That would be awesome, because the more likes we have, the more attention we get, that sort of thing. And speaking of attention, if you do like the show, we're going to ask that you start reviewing it and talking about it in different places, the iTunes Store, etc. As far as getting a hold of us directly, you can reach us by email at monsterkidradio@gmail.com or by phone at 503-479-5MKR. So in part 1 of this discussion with Devon, we're going to talk a little bit about what he does, his background a little bit, and we're going to talk about The Fly, starring Vincent Price. This was a fun movie to go back to. I hadn't watched it in a long time leading up to this conversation, so it was really nice to kind of revisit this, kind of get my mad scientist groove on a little bit with an iconic movie when it comes to 50s sci-fi fare. Now, this recording was done earlier this year. I believe it was done back in March, which means that some of the things that Devon's talking about, things that are coming soon, like the upcoming release of Tales of Hot Rod Horror Volume 2, it's already come to pass. So you don't have to wait for it to come out. You can go pick it up right now. Something that is coming up soon for Devon, however, is a local show at a business here in Portland from June 10th to July 28th at a business called The Peculiarium. He's having an art show. The reception happens June 29th from 6 to 9 p.m. The Peculiarium is located at 2234 Northwest Thurman Street in Portland, Oregon. You can find out more about that by going to their website at peculiarium.com. Again, there will be a link in the show notes because I know that's kind of a hard thing to say, let alone spell, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. peculiarium.com. Devon's got a show happening. And actually, since this show is going out on June 11th, the show's already kicked off. If you guys are in the area, do yourselves a favor. Go check out his artwork. Go check out his website if you're not in the area. And just see what Devon's all about. He loves his stuff as much as we do. We want to support our fellow monster kids. And speaking of which, I'm tired of talking. Let's let Devon chat for a little bit. All right, so I am joined right now by Devon Devereaux, an artist that I finally met in person, face-to-face, at Crypticon Seattle 2012, where I picked up a print of his that I can best describe as Cthulhu in a Cadillac. It's at my desk right now at work. I've got it framed up. It's sitting there. It keeps me company during the day job. So thank you very much, Devon, and welcome to the show.
Very cool. Thanks. It's I'm glad to be here.
Now, before we get started, why do we have you on the show? Who are you?
Well, I'm a local guy, so I'm Portland-based. I'm an illustrator and a publisher and sometimes a writer. I'm responsible for putting out the Tales of Hot Rod Horror comic books, and we are putting out our newest volume in March, Tales of Hot Rod Horror Volume 2. And we've got a lot of great comic artists and writers on there. We've got KRK Ryden, who is an artist for Devo, did some of the Devo covers way back in the day. Rick Geary, who is well known in a lot of comic book circles, worked for Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, all the DC big books of. We got David, writer of Faust. He's my writing partner. So most of my published work has all been written by David. And he wrote for Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, very well known in the horror comics community. And also wrote a book called The Littlest Bitch, which is a twisted children's book that him and I put out a couple of years ago, too, through Sellers Books. And you can find all of David and I's stuff on Amazon.com. Or you can go to my website, which is devondeveraux.com, DEVON, DEVEREAUX.com.
And we'll make sure there's links to that in the show notes and over at our website. And you also have cracklingimpress.com as well, right?
It's, cackling imp, as in laughing. So,
sorry.
Yeah. No, not a problem. So,
see, that's why I have you on the show, to keep me in check.
Cackling Impress. Yeah.
Excellent. So, yeah, guys, go check that out when you're done listening to this, or while you're listening, whatever. Just make sure you go there at some point. Now, I put the call out on Facebook for people who might want to chat with us today about a classic sci-fi movie. And Devon came up with The Fly from 1958. Mm-hmm. Why did you pick this movie, man?
So you said you were looking for something specifically from the 50s. So my immediate thought was one of my all-time favorite movies was Plan 9 from Outer Space. But I know you're trying to get away from the zombie stuff, so I was kind of thinking about it and what else was, sci-fi horror related from the 50s. And I said The Fly with Vincent Price. Anything with Vincent Price would be great to talk about.
When I think Vincent Price, I don't really think the sci-fi horror. I immediately go to the Roger Corman, the gothic stuff.
Absolutely.
I don't go to the sci-fi kind of almost mad scientist type movie that this is. Not that Vincent Price is a mad scientist in this movie, but this has that kind of twisted science gone amok kind of vibe going for it. And I haven't seen this movie in years. I mean, it's been at least 10 years, if not longer for me.
Yeah, I just watched it again last night, and I saw the remake, and I watched it at Halloween last year with Jeff Goldblum, and that one always holds up really, really well. It stands the test of time.
That one's aged really well,
and so is this one. I mean, this one is they do a really, really good job of building the story in this one and kind of making it into a mystery. And they do a really good job of pacing this all the way up until the end, the Vincent Price one, until you get to the final reveal.
Right. Yeah. I when I think back on The Fly, when I think about my memories of it, I remembered it being more like science run amok, and that's how I described it a second ago. But that's really not accurate. This movie is a mystery. It's very dramatic. It's a little melodramatic in spots.
Yeah.
But it's not that kind of shock you. Mad scientist trying to do something crazy and evil kind of thing. It's just a guy experimenting who gets caught up in his own experiments and trapped by his own ambition, and the people around him kind of dealing with the fallout of that. It's a fascinating film. It
is, and it's much more like a Hitchcock movie where they just let things build and build and build and build and build. And my buddy Sean and I kind of talk about what makes something a horror film and what makes something genuinely scary. And it's building that contrast of making you like the characters, putting you in a safe place, and then just turning everything upside down on its head. And Fly is a perfect example of using that horror formula.
Definitely. Now, when it kicks off, the movie starts pretty gruesome. I didn't remember the blood. And I was a little taken aback when I saw it. I wasn't really expecting it to happen. I mean, we've got a body trapped in a press, and there's blood pouring or had poured down the side of it.
Pretty gruesome for the time.
Yeah, for 1958, I was not. I didn't remember that. Maybe that's a testament of the film. I mean, you don't remember the gore, you remember everything else about it. But I mean, that really, I can't imagine what audiences thought.
Yeah, I'm sure that was pretty jarring. What other movies at the time would you go see that have somebody completely crushed and their body half coming out of a hydraulic press with blood all over?
And to make it worse, not only was it done once, but we learned pretty quickly that the press was brought down on the body twice.
Right.
So that's not just an accident. That was an intentional.
Absolutely.
So that really took me aback. I was also a little surprised. My memories were more Vincent Price heavy, and really he's not.
That's the thing that I noticed about it too is you always identify Vincent Price as carrying the film, but no, it's the actress Patricia Owens. She has more screen time than anybody, and most of the film is done with flashback, and I'd say there's a good 40-minute sequence where Vincent Price doesn't even show up at all.
Yeah, he's kind of like a framing device. He's the one telling us the story. It's a flashback kind of thing. It's him and the inspector, Herbert Marshall, played him, just investigating what happened, and then Patricia Owens kind of explaining what had happened to her and her husband, Andre, played by David Hedison, billed as Al Hedison in the movie.
That's just a testament to Vincent Price, where when he just shows up, he just chomps the scenes, and just you can't forget about him. Even in Edward Scissorhands, when he shows up, he's only in it for a good 5 minutes at most. But when you think about that movie, I think of Johnny Depp and Vincent Price as the main people when I think back on that.
Yeah, Vincent Price is like a walking mustachioed charisma. That's all he is. You can't help but watch him and just be enthralled by just his voice alone, let alone his very subtle body acting. Very subtle.
Do you ever notice he's always either wearing a smoking jacket or a cardigan whenever he shows up in a movie? And when I was watching this, and once again, it starts out with he gets a phone call, and it's late at night, and he's in his smoking jacket just at his desk, and it seems like any of the Roger Corman, Vincent Price movies, he's always showing up in some kind of a red smoking jacket. Hilarious.
I don't know if I've ever seen him wearing anything but, something somewhat formal. Like, did the man ever own a pair of jeans,
Someone get this man an ascot and a smoking jacket.
That was on his rider whenever he signed on for a film. That was always included in the wardrobe.
Yeah.
So as you said, the movie opens with him getting a phone call from, Helene. Now the relationship is that Helene is his sister-in-law, Andre's his brother. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a romance that never blossomed with those two, and she ended up marrying his brother and had a child with the brother. And
she's panicking. She needs to see Francois, played by Price. Which, real quick, everybody's French in this movie, but I don't know if there's one real French accent. Right. In any of this, and
it's supposed to be in Montreal, right?
Was it Montreal? Okay, so French Canadian, Canada.
French Canadian.
Yeah, okay. Still, I don't know if I buy Vincent Price as French Canadian, but
not at all. No.
Just one of those voices. So yeah, he gets a phone call, and this kicks off the story of The Fly. Nowadays, I think it's pretty straightforward. We kind of know what the story is, even though we're a little surprised that, wait a minute, Price isn't in it as much as we thought he was. I think we all kind of know the story now. And when I was watching it this morning myself to get ready for this recording, I kept waiting. Okay, where's the reveal? Where's the reveal? I know the pulling the hood off the face is coming. Where's that happening? They made us wait for that thing. Mm-hmm. They really milked that out. And I think back when the movie was first released, that had to have been a shock, right? I can't think of any movie that would have prepped audiences for something like that.
But I don't know, though. I think in the older movies, there was a real confidence with, being able to hold back and hold back the monster effects. And I don't know, maybe it was his budget. Maybe, maybe it was just cheaper to do it that way. But I think a lot of current monster movies are really ruined by they do the reveal way too early on, and they don't let things build. It's like when you're cooking something in the kitchen, you want to make sure that everything gets to a boil. Mm-hmm. But it's like if you start out with everything, you're not invested. You have no basis for reality.
Right, and I agree. I mean, I think it was effective. I just found myself getting a little more impatient because I knew it was coming. Mm-hmm. And I had seen it before, so
sure.
I had that memory of it. Plus, the scene's been lampooned or spoofed or homaged, so I knew it was coming. I was prepped for it. But back then, you're absolutely right. I think the monster movie, especially a monster movie from a main studio like this, what was it, Fox that put this out? Mm-hmm. 20th Century Fox. Like you said, there's a confidence to the reveal and the build, and the whole movie feels more like a drama to me than a flat-out scary sci-fi movie.
You know what movie I would compare it to was the original Child's Play. Because if you're watching Child's Play for the very, very first time, it's not till about the end of the second act into the movie that you are thinking, hey, maybe that this doll is actually the antagonist, because the whole time you're kind of thinking that it's this child that is the real killer in the movie. So I think with The Fly, if you're watching it for the very first time, you're kind of wondering, maybe it's Helene actually killed this guy, and what actually happened, because she has a motive. There's a love interest with Francois. Maybe there's something else going on here, and then it's kind of hinted at that it could be this other sci-fi element, but up until that point, the movie could just play out as a regular murder mystery.
You bring up the potential romance, and I don't know if that was something that I'd really considered until you actually mentioned it. You're absolutely right. This could have been just a crazed plot by two lovers trying to get back together, and there's this brother or husband that's in the way, and he's a scientist guy who does all this crazy stuff we don't understand. So, there's this whole story that she could have been building up, and that's an interesting approach. I like that.
Cool.
So the woman, the wife, we mentioned her name earlier, Helene, played by Patricia Owens. Her portrayal is pretty typical of a lot of 50s sci-fi monster movies. The woman who screams every time something scary happens. That's so I did find myself rolling my eyes a little bit with with that portrayal. But that's also a sign of the times. I mean, we can't really damn them for that. That's just kind of how it was, unfortunately, right or wrong. Beyond that, though, she's still able to push through some of these stereotypes and these tropes, I suppose you can say, of these films.
Yeah, it really is her. It really is her movie.
Exactly. I mean, you still find yourself being empathetic toward her and kind of rooting for her. Mm-hmm. And towards the end, when Francois and the inspector start playing along with maybe understanding and accepting what she's doing and don't really let on that she's about to get taken away to the asylum or the hospital, I really kind of felt for her and was kind of glad. She's gonna be okay. Right. She did what she had to do, and she convinced everybody that was what would happen. I was pretty impressed.
They did a really good job of building tension in the last 5 minutes of the movie, with everything kind of came to a head with the police inspector coming to the hospital, and the reveal of the fly in the spider trap, and then Vincent Price running to the bench where the cobweb is. So they did a really good job of just ramping up the volume in the last 5 minutes of the movie, I thought.
Sure. Well, I mean, part of this her acting, and a big part of it I would have to credit to the director, Kurt Neumann. I'm not overly familiar with his work. I did stumble across something online that says he might have been considered for The Bride of Frankenstein, which would have been very interesting.
Yeah, the only other thing that looked notable to me was he directed a handful of the Tarzan movies from the 1940s. Mm-hmm. And I think besides The Fly, I think this was his most well-known film. And it looks like he died before The Fly ever came out in the theaters. He went to an original screening at the studio, so he never got to see the success that The Fly had in the theater. That was the biggest hit of his career.
Was the movie a success at its release?
I believe it was, yeah. It sounded like it was very, very well reviewed and one of the highest grossing horror films of the 50s.
Mm-hmm. He directed a couple other things that I hope to cover at some point here on Monster Kid Radio, things like Rocket Ship XM from 1950 and Kronos from 1957. But certainly The Fly is his most well-known production and his final. So, we've been kind of skipping around. This is what happened in the beginning. This is what happened at the end. There's a lot of good stuff that happens throughout the entire film. I think the chemistry and the relationship between Helene and Andre is very interesting and fascinating to me, as Andre is exploring science and trying to come up with this transportation device. I believed him as a scientist. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it gets a little difficult to portray the scientist-type characters in these movies when they just start having them start throwing, well, they call it technobabble in Star Trek, that technobabble kind of stuff. They kind of avoided that with this.
No, they made him very human.
Yeah, exactly. They humanized the character, so when what happens to him, I did feel pathos and sympathy for his situation, and I thought that was, again, a good choice on behalf of the director, and then the actor, Hedison, I think did a wonderful job doing that. I felt like he and Owens had a real relationship, and they really had a connection through the entire movie. I felt Price, I mean, I hate to say it because it's Vincent Price, but it felt a little like stunt casted to me with Price, because I don't know if I bought that he was really related to everybody, but he's still great to watch.
It seems like they kind of just brought him in for maybe 1 or 2 days of shooting. And,
yeah.
They were like, we need a big name for this movie. Let's bring this guy in.
Exactly, right?
But in retrospect, the best scene of the film, is he totally owns it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we want to talk a little bit about the plot. I think most people know what the story is, but bottom line, it's about Andre. He's trying to transport matter from one location to another. Starts with a plate, and as fans of any Fly movie really kind of can guess, it doesn't go right. Right off the bat, the plate is reversed, and you can tell that by the printing on the back of the plate being reversed when it goes over, which immediately reminded me of what happens in the Fly remake when they try to transport a dog. Or no, it was a monkey, right, that got turned inside out.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So, yeah, it immediately made me think of that. And as the experiment continues and progresses, Andre's doing his best to play both roles, dutiful husband, dedicated scientist, takes his wife out to the ballet, but still can't turn off the scientist part of his brain because while they're at the ballet, he's coming up with formulas and writing it down on the program, and his wife is rolling her eyes, oh, that's just my husband, but she's not upset about it. She's a very supportive wife, understands that she married a scientist. As the movie continues, he escalates his experiments, and there's a very unfortunate accident with the family cat. Which, because I knew what happened to the monkey in the remake, and because we saw the blood at the very beginning of the movie, I was bracing myself for something that would have passed for gruesome in 1958 regarding that cat. I'm glad it didn't happen, because I'm a cat person. I think I had a cat on my lap when I was watching that scene. But instead of anything happening visually to the cat, it just kind of disappears. We start to hear the meows in the ether somewhere. So somewhere out there, the cat's still there, but it just disappears. Now, he doesn't tell anybody about the cat until later when he's showing his wife the fruits of his continued labor. Eventually, we learn that he tried to transport himself, and there's a fly in the box, and I think we kind of know what happened from there.
Yeah.
But again, all this is happening while Helene is telling her story, and she's the one selling everything, and it's really told from her point of view.
Right, and that's the one thing I really loved about the storytelling in the movie is that you don't see him go into the chamber and then come out as the fly like they did in the Jeff Goldblum movie. It's just she's going on with her life, and then it's happening as she's doing other things, and you don't realize that something has gone wrong until she starts picking up the notes that he's sliding under the door.
Asking for milk laced with rum?
Well, who doesn't do that?
Well, yeah. Well, I next time I'm looking to catch some flies, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Set some milk out with some rum, right?
They all love that. We all know that.
Sure. When we finally do see some of the fly-man hybrid, it's when the hand flops out when he's trying to, when he's being emphatic and he's trying to gesture, and this fly hand comes out, and it's a wonderful reveal. I mean, the body language that Hedison was able, I'm assuming it was Hedison in the fly mask, the body language that he had with the fly hand and the towel over his head, hiding his head, his fly head, I thought was very well done. And he's trying to control the fly hand, and it seems to have a mind of its own every once in a while. What did you think of the creature design, the monster effect here?
I thought it was great, and for the time, it works perfectly. And there's things about the old movies that just worked really, really well. Where I don't know if you'd be able to get away with that today if you were to do another fly movie and you did it exactly, with the makeup. But I mean, just something about the tone of the movie and everything. It's some of those old effects just work perfectly. Then if you stack them up against anything that we're doing today. I don't know. How about you?
I think it's part of the 50s aesthetic to have that kind of monster suit style monster effect, and I think today you'd see it all CG'd up. It'd be a guy in a green screen suit with ping pong balls glued over it, and they'd fix it in post and put something horrific on there. But I like that 50s aesthetic. I like that kind of retro pop feel to that, I don't know if it would fly today with modern audiences. It would work for an audience made up of people like you and me.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, there aren't enough people like that out there.
Yeah, well, it's also people are trained for the aesthetic of the day too, and even if you try to go back and do a movie like it was done in the 80s, people are just trained visually to see things. They're just programmed to see things differently, and anytime you break the mold of what the current aesthetic is, you're taking a big risk.
That's true. I mean, it's one of the things maybe modern audiences would need to be prepped for. I know that every once in a while there will be a retro film kind of put out there. Alien Trespass comes to mind, which was put out a few years ago. It was done as like a throwback 50s sci-fi, It Conquered the World style kind of movie.
Well, you had mentioned Matinee earlier.
Yeah, and Matinee is fantastic.
And I think Matinee. Did you also see the movie Popcorn that came out in 1990?
Yeah, that's kind of like a throwback to the 80s style, isn't it?
Well, it was made in 1990. And that's when it came out, but it was a love letter to William Castle. So,
Oh, right, with the theater set and everything.
yeah, they had the stench where there was a serial killer in the movie theater, and they were pouring the stench in while they're watching it. And then there was one called Mosquito, and the Mosquito was a lot like The Fly or the 1950s movies.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if you got a chance, but Dee Wallace, who was at Crypticon last year, I had her sign my popcorn Laserdisc. I don't know if you had a chance to talk to her, but she was in it.
Nice. And there's an independent filmmaker named Christopher R. Mim who puts out what he calls good bad movies, and they're basically love letters, throwbacks to the 50s style, monster movies. And he's been doing those one a year since 2004. 2005. He's up to like movie number 7 or 8 now. So, there are some niche audiences for this kind of thing.
Sure.
As far as like a wide release, I don't know if something like this would fly, but that's okay. We have it on DVD. We can enjoy it.
That's true.
And it is easily available on DVD. It's something you can get your hands on pretty quickly. I found it through a couple of different online retailers as well. So it's real easy to find. If people haven't seen it, they need to. I think it's one of the classics.
And I mean, and that being said, I really love the '86 Fly movie with the Cronenberg one. I thought that was a brilliant remake. And I don't know. I mean, maybe somebody will do it again, and it'll be cool for whatever the 2000 teens are going to look like.
True. It's definitely a different vibe. It's a totally different aesthetic. You've got Cronenberg kind of working through his body horror problems, obsession in the Fly remake. It really doesn't have a lot to do with this original film. Now, I've not read the short story that this film was based on. It's based on a short story called The Fly by George Langeland. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that Cronenberg's is a little bit more true to the short story, but I don't know for sure. Like I said, I haven't read the short story. My experience with remakes of movies like this is that, one, if I can approach it as not a remake but just another adaptation, it's a little bit of an easier sell for me. But when you've got the literature background or the literature base, it seems like movies, when you revisit, or stories like this, you revisit them, they are successful. Like Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World and Carpenter's The Thing. It's another example of a movie made in the 50s and then redone in the 80s, all stemming from a short story, but still having some of the similar elements. And again, it's a successful reworking of that story for that audience. So you're right. Maybe, as we get further along, if there's somebody else who wants to take another crack at this story, I'd give it a shot. I mean, I think the bare bones are there for something that can be really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And who doesn't like science run amok movies anyway, right?
I got a question for you. Is this the first... I can't think of a movie earlier than this that dealt with teleportation.
I can't think of a movie either that does it this way, at least in terms of us as human beings trying to do it. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if there was a science fiction movie out there where there's some alien race that teleport things back and forth. There's some superior intelligence out there that does it. But in terms of us trying to figure it out, I can't think of anything that had done it before this. Yeah,
well, I was reading a little bit about teleportation last night, and I guess it was... do you know who Charles Fort is from 40 in Times?
Oh, yeah. But in case anybody out there who doesn't, who is Charles Fort?
Well, Charles Fort wrote a series of books in the 1930s. He was kind of like a Robert Ripley type, mm-hmm. and just he was really, open-minded to a fault, where he would investigate the paranormal, the supernatural, and didn't really care about science, where science played into any of this stuff. He said that let's just view this from open eyes without any kind of dogmas, whether it be religion or science or what have you. And let's just see things for how they actually are, and let's not use science and religion or any other philosophies to explain things away, which was the opposite of actually explaining something. And I always liked that. I always thought that was a really cool way to look at life, and a fun way to look at it. But he did a book called Lo, just L-O exclamation point, and that was the first mention of teleportation. And he kind of talked about how things in nature could disappear and reappear in another place. And in science fiction, after that, it started to become more popular. But from the little research I've done on Wikipedia and how stuff works, it sounds like Charles Fort was the person that coined that phrase.
Okay. Yeah, Charles Fort, you mentioned 40 in Times. I mean, that's a magazine that's on the news rack today. You can still pick that up now. It's always an interesting read. Whenever I head down to like the Powell's City of Bookstore here in Portland, if I see it on the shelf, I'll pick it up and flip through it. I don't necessarily buy it unless it's like about zombies or something, but it's an interesting magazine at least.
I love it. I had a subscription for a while, but it gets so expensive because it's one of the UK books, so it's like $10 an issue.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I can't think of anything else that had really tapped into teleportation. Now, granted, when Star Trek came along, you had the transporters and things like that. And even in Star Trek the Motion Picture, you had the transporter accident where, somebody being transported had the body problem.
That was such a creepy scene.
It really was. It made me think a little bit. I mean, I know it came out before, but it does make me think of Cronenberg's The Fly.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
That. As far as the transportation or the teleportation effects in 58's The Fly, I liked it. It wasn't overly flashy. Mm-hmm. I think it worked for what it needed to do.
Yeah, it was just a different type of storytelling. If you're invested in a story, you kind of have a suspension of disbelief, and you don't necessarily have to make things look realistic. It's just a way of telling a story. It's like when you watch a cartoon, you don't need things to look realistic. You just need things to fit the mood of the film.
Right. It needs to be consistent, not necessarily realistic. Right. And there is a consistency to all the science happening here. It's not, bubbling beakers and Jacob's ladders and all this flashy electricity or whatever. You have some bright lights that come up and go down.
A lot of neon signs.
There really were, right?
It's like Las Vegas.
But the transportation itself, they would go in post, I guess, and hand draw, or I don't know how they would have done it, but they took the transportation box and made it so bright you couldn't see anything in it, and then dimmed it back down and the thing was gone, and that was it. We never really saw it appear in the other box, and I thought that was a wise choice. Mm-hmm. Working within your limitations when it comes to budgets and special effects. The teleportation, the receiving end was always in another room on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting choice and probably pretty smart in a result of budget. But I think it works because it adds just a touch of suspense that's already there. It just kind of adds to it.
Definitely. And I think, once again, it's if you invest in the characters in a movie like that and you make the characters charming and likable, you can get away with a lot of things. And, I kind of think of the Star Wars prequels where they did a lot of things right visually, but you were never invested in any of the characters.
We could do a whole podcast about that. we probably shouldn't, but we probably could. Big thanks to Devon for joining us here at Monster Kid Radio. Again, check out his website at devondevereaux.com. And check out the Tales of Hot Rod Horror, Volume 1 and Volume 2. I've got them both here. They're great. I love them. I've read them more than once. It's a lot of fun. It's that retro pop 50s kitsch. I love it. Just fun stuff. We're going to have Devon back in a couple of days for part 2 of our chat. We're going to talk a little bit more about The Fly, talk about some potentially Lovecraftian themes that might turn up in the movie, as well as continue to talk about the remake and things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun to get Devon back on the show. And then we're going to schedule him for future episodes down the line as well. Maybe talk about some William Castle films. If you want to hear more Devon between now and then, I highly recommend you go check out his podcast, the Cackling Imp Podcast. You can find it on iTunes or just do a search for it in Google or your preferred search engine of choice. And specifically, if you're looking to just kind of test it out a little bit, check out episode 22. He interviews Bryn Barron, who played one of the vampire brides in the Monster Squad. Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivations 3.0 Unported license. Of course, that does not extend to the song that we're going to play here. It is called Goatman's Bridge from Beware the Dangers of a Ghost Scorpion, which appears in this episode of Monster Kid Radio by permission.
Ha ha ha!